want you to go here. What are we doing?
So, I'm Ivy.
And I'm Jaguar.
And we are here today to talk about conscious communicating. What does that mean to you? To me, it means ascending victimhood consciousness enough to meet another in a real, vulnerable human place. And to me, it's impossible to consciously communicate with somebody if you are residing in a victimhood state or looking to your outside environment to validate you.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, it's something that, we get to explore and kind of grow. And for me, it's always been that beautiful perspective of communication and like constant learning, through partnerships or even connections or even communicating with those that we may have, friction with. And the key to communicating clearly is taking the time to be with your emotions first. So, whatever is happening in the moment, if your emotions are overwhelming you, it's a good practice to take that time, that space to kind of just process it out first on your own time. And when you feel clear and you feel clear and present, then come into the communication. So then that way it's flowing from the heart without any toxicity and poison. And the thing that happens normally in the drama of humanity.
As many of you know, me and Chagi used to be in a monogamous relationship, and we entered that dynamic with the conscious understanding that monogamy is a beautiful container for the transmutation of many shadows. Because in such a deep container like that, there's nowhere for them to hide. And you are forced to consciously communicate about all of it. All of it's on the table. And through our transition process that you guys have gotten to witness a little bit of, there has been so many conversations, conscious communication, making sure that the other person is heard, that the other person's needs are being met. And I feel like we're saying the same thing in different ways, and I really enjoy that, where you have to take care of yourself first. In order to meet somebody in a conscious conversation, that means that you have to be conscious of your own process, your own woundages, and anything standing in the way of actually seeing another person and their truth. And I felt like I really got to learn that a lot throughout our dynamic. And another interesting topic is having a conscious conversation with somebody who is not well versed in having a conscious conversation. What would you suggest to people when they're like trying to have that conscious conversation and dynamic with somebody who is not familiar with that in any way?
Well, you're gonna have interactions with people, and everyone's at their own level of growth. And conscious communication for me just means just being aware and present and really doing your best to communicate clearly, and have a mutual compromise.
Mm-hmm.
So with anyone that you meet and you're having this communication, whether it's like really intense or really light, if it's really intense, check in with yourself, see where the communication is heading. And sometimes it can be going into this victim emotional space that the person might be pulling into. And through our upbringing and childhood traumas, we tend to go into these and that person
Stories, we like to call them.
stories, and that person then begins to dictate the energy of the conversation. So one great way that I've found is to be aware that maybe the person you're speaking to is in a triggered space and is feeling emotions, and in that beautiful space you got to check in with yourself, be clear, not take anything personally, and especially as a masculine, being able to hold that space, but also emanate and radiate love, radiate understanding and peace. And you'll just find how beautiful it is, how this energy play begins to happen. And if you hold your posture, your form of love, then the other person then begins to relax and realize that you're not bringing back what they're throwing out. And from that space, it can either meet in a mutual understanding, or the other person may be going into a deeper trigger just to test, because everyone wants to feel safe to be vulnerable, so they'll test you. And that's when the rubber meets the road, and you see how good your inner work has been, because if you can hold that space, and it'll help them kind of relax and be vulnerable. And that's all we want to do, is just be vulnerable and be heard. So just listening, not thinking about what you're going to say next, but just listen, be present with that. And repeating back sometimes is also beautiful, to be like, is this what she said? To like kind of iron out any misunderstandings in the moment. And that way it also allows a person to be like, to feel that, oh, this person's listening to me, they're repeating, they're wanting to check in if this is what they're saying, and that also allows a peace to continue, and a compromise to kind of emanate. Because when we go into these, especially if there's friction, we don't, both sides have medicine, both sides have something to offer, and we have to realize that with that connection we can reach a third level of co-creation and understanding and communication, where an insight is brought to both parties and both people actually gain from that. So the only thing is, like, if it starts escalating, and that's only like just a little tip on that, if it starts escalating to a space of disrespect, don't be afraid to walk out. Don't be afraid to say, I'm gonna just take my leave now and come back when we're both in a space of clear, of acceptance, of being able to communicate. And whatever they say to you, just stay true to you with that, and honor yourself, because it's your energy and it's your right to protect that.
So in conclusion, well, I feel like we're just getting started, but conscious communicating, doing the work on yourself first, to make sure that you are in a place where you are actually wanting to find a solution, not who's right, not I'm right or they're right, but coming to a compromise and realizing that both people have their truths that have medicine. To consciously communicate, I feel, alongside transcending victimhood consciousness is, and I'm going to speak on victimhood consciousness for a second. I feel that many of us can relate to the insatiable child that comes out when in dynamics, the child that can never be satisfied by whatever the other person says or does, and they are just so in their wounds that they can never be satisfied. What I have found is that is a surefire sign that you are ignoring yourself so deeply that you are pushing that responsibility onto someone else. And they are never going to be able to satisfy that insatiable child, because that child inside of you is crying out for your own love. It's saying, hey, pay attention to me, love me. Don't just shove me off onto this person. I want your love. And when we can really, really, really do the inner work to transcend victimhood consciousness and realize that we are our own saviors, then when we meet in communication with each other, we can be in a place of wholeness and a place of receptivity. And without being in a place of receptivity, there is nothing to receive. and there's nothing to gain and there's nothing to grow from the conversation. And a conscious conversation is a conversation in which both parties are interested in growing and looking at themselves honestly and taking conscious steps forward towards a healthy compromise between both parties. I feel like in our connection, we did a lot of work around the insatiable child, and you really held me through a lot of that. And through our dynamic, we have grown extensively as people, but without that conscious communication and that desire to let your ego self. And I'm not going to shame the ego in this moment. I love and I appreciate every part of me, and I believe that there is no part of me that I was born with that I was not meant to have, including my ego. However, there are certain seats for certain aspects of you, and it's learning to take that ego out of the driver's seat and say, thanks, buddy, awesome, you're trying to keep me safe. I'm safe, we're good. And putting your higher self in the driver's seat. And from there, real growth can actually be made and found, and parties can learn from each other, instead of, because I found that one person is never right in any situation ever. It is always a complex, beautiful, colorful palette of medicine. And I feel like we found that a lot in our connection. We had a lot of deep drop-ins and a lot of moments where we really had to grow and learn, and it can be so difficult, and we understand more than anyone when you're in your most triggered state. So I love what you said on just walk away. And that ties into take care of yourself. You cannot be validated by another person's experience of you. If you're validated by another person's experience of you, you can't consciously communicate because you can't bring your truth to the table.
Yeah, and touching into our connection and partnership, so those that are in partnership, and especially, I'm speaking to the men, and for me, that was huge growth, because in this intense container of going one-on-one with each other, a lot of childhood trauma comes up, like I was saying, and for me, that was very, very in the forefront. And it kept escalating, and that was due to a lot of factors. The main factor was I wasn't taking care of myself, so I wasn't able to hold my vibration in my space, at the optimal, which allowed the feminine to explore all aspects of emotion. And I noticed myself go into a reactionary state, and when that reactionary state happens, because as the masculine, need to hold that foundation, that rock, that knowing that there's nothing that the other, especially your woman partner, can do to sway the energy, because in that way, she's allowed to explore all parts of this emotion. And once you realize that it's not about you, and it's not like, she doesn't need to hold this mother kind of dynamic with you, then from that growth, from that like adult place of the masculine, we can begin holding her and just being love, and witnessing, and just being in the midst of the storm and having peace. And I noticed when I did do that, our interaction, our communication would go into insight mode, but when I would go into reactionary state, we would both sink, because one party needs to be afloat. And fortunately, us men have an ability to kind of block out emotion for the time being, and if we tune into that, there's a gift in that. And with that, I feel like the feminine can feel safe and surrender, and explore that oracle, that priestess, that water, to see like where we're going with it. But ultimately, they can then after reflect and be like, oh, okay, this made sense, this was a little intense, without needing to process your toxic reactions or anything you throw on them, because they're already working with emotion a lot, and emotion is very intense to maneuver through. And if you're adding on top your emotions on top of that, it becomes it's not a good place for, I feel like, a female to process that on top of her own emotional process.
Speaking on that though, to speak to the women, we each carry, I love what you're saying, and I completely agree with all of that. And I want to speak to the women's side of things, where it's basically like we each carry a masculine feminine dynamic within us, and in relations we tend to, if we're masculine and body masculine, or if we're feminine and body feminine, and that's not saying that we're born with that body necessarily, just whatever energy we identify a little more in relation. And maybe we co-exhibit between both of them simultaneously and beautifully. And we're completely equal in that. But maybe some of us have more of an energetic lean on. And for the women, if you are not holding yourself in your own masculine, and you are not holding that structure within your own being so that your feminine can feel safe to explore what she's actually feeling, you can never deliver that to your partner with grace and honesty, because you are not in touch with that. Your being is ungrounded in its masculine, and it's the masculine's job to hold the feminine enough to explore, like you were saying, what she really feels and what's really going on, and sinking into that. So I think it's so important for the women to also, like you're saying, the men to lean into their emotions, and it's important for the women to lean into holding themselves and being in trust that you got yourself, because that also means that when you trust that you got you, you can trust that others got you too, to whatever extent they're capable of. And if your partner is not in a place where they are able to show up for you, you can show up for you, and it doesn't create the inner child tantrum of a lifetime.
So I hope that's any part of this is helping you guys, those that are in partnerships, or those that are just like wanting to explore, conscious communicating and just like communicate and share yourself and express yourself in a way where, more compromise, more mutual connection, can happen. And just keep on doing the work. It's not easy, but those that resonate with you just are there to help you grow. Even those that don't are there to help you grow. So just tune into that and know that life is ultimately like light and fun and playful, and we're all healing here. We're all just little wounded kids that need to get that out of the way so we can hold ourselves and our higher selves and bring that new wave, that renaissance of humanity that's kind of dawning upon us now.
Next.
So subscribe and follow. I got a YouTube channel, Jaguar, and this beautiful goddess.
I have a YouTube channel. Okay, so this has been Conscious Communication with
Jaguar
and Ivy.
I hope. Uh-huh.
Well, that is a sexy sight.